And although we make a specialty product, a specialty commodity jet fuel product that is high performance, carbon neutral, and drop in substitutable, it is still a commodity product. And the laws of commodity markets still pertain. Those who can do it in a low cost way will be successful long term. Those who cannot do it in a low cost way may benefit from this current mix of subsidies and mandates, but those subsidies and mandates cannot persist forever. And Syntholene wants nothing less than to go toe to toe with fossil based petroleum and prove that the future of synthetic fuel is going to be better quality at a lower price.
Syntholene is commercializing a novel hybrid thermal system to produce ultra-pure, carbon-neutral, synthetic jet fuel targeting production costs 70% lower than competitors. We've got CEO Dan Sutton here to tell us the story. Please remember this is neither a recommendation nor investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. I'm Martin Gagel with Market Radius Research. Dan, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Martin. Such a great pleasure to spend time with you and your audience today, and excited to crack into the story of what is not just an exciting company that I'm so proud to be building with my team, but also an emergent sector in e-fuels, which I think your audience should take a distinct interest in over the next 5 years.
It is the age of energy. Everyone's clamoring for energy, also a huge portfolio of we need everything. So this sounds very timely and excellent. So why don't you walk us through your presentation deck, and then we can circle back in and discuss various aspects. So thanks for doing this.
Fantastic, and thanks so much. And as Martin duly mentioned, we are in the business of actively commercializing a novel, low-cost production system to make high-performance, carbon neutral, and drop-in substitutable jet fuel, synthetic jet fuel of exceptional purity. And this market is growing notwithstanding Syntholene's participation. The e-fuels market, which is new to most investors that I speak to, is about $8.5 billion globally this year, and it's projected to grow to up to $215 billion by 2032. That makes it one of the fastest growing subsets of the energy market, and there is a massive confluence of both consumer demand as well as government policy, mandates, subsidies, all kinds of interwoven policy measures that are encouraging the growth of this industry. So it really is a perfect storm of opportunity for people who see the value in these high quality hydrocarbon fuels to start building a portfolio, to start getting some exposure. And I feel very lucky to be many people's first introduction to this novel fuel production pathway and also to the broader e-fuel sector in general. I'd like to open with this because we've run our society on hydrocarbon petroleum fuels for about 150 years. They underpin every luxury, amenity, technology, quality of life. They've extended lifespans. They've underpinned the existence of modern medicine, global trade, labor mobility. And coming back right to the origin story, Standard Oil's brand promise at the outset of discovering kerosene was simply to provide the highest quality fuel at the lowest possible price. And somewhere along the way, especially in the boom of clean tech, ESG, clean energy systems, we got away from this premise that in order for energy systems to persist, to be adopted reasonably, rationally, and economically, we need to deliver high energy density fuels, energy systems, power plants, and we need to do it in a way that customers are self-interested in choosing those energy solutions. And that is the business that Syntholene is in. Our product is pretty exceptional. Synthetic fuels have actually been around a long time. Synthetic motor oil in their cars already today. And when I ask investors, why do you use synthetic motor oil? They usually respond, well, I'm not 100% sure, but my mechanic likes it. And it really is because it is molecularly pure. This allows for far higher performance, more durability, better outcomes for engine operation, duration, and more resilience. And so when we apply that same logic to liquid hydrocarbon fuels, the output for these synthetic fuels in their production systems are fuels that are actually exceptionally high energy density, generally far higher energy density than fossil hydrocarbons or bio-based hydrocarbons. In our case, we use captured carbon as one of our core feedstocks, and that makes these fuels carbon neutral. That enables them to be eligible for these green premium markets, such as synthetic sustainable aviation fuel, ESAF, which is the product that we make. And the greatest thing about them is that we make kerosene. It's drop-in substitutable. We can use it for any motor, engine, or turbine. We can use it with the same tankers and pipelines that are using petroleum-based fuels today. So we are not asking for any new redesigns or retrofits or changes in consumer behavior to utilize this fuel. We can continue to use hydrocarbon fuels far longer than the reserves of fossil and bio-based inputs will last. And so we can continue to utilize what is ultimately like tens, if not hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of petroleum fired infrastructure that we rely on today.
Dan, sorry to interrupt.
Yes,
Just to be clear, jet fuel is kerosene, right?
jet fuel is kerosene.
All right.
CH12 to CH16, that's how we operate jet turbines. And in our current understanding of physics and technology and chemistry, there's no real other way to be able to propel planes at such speed that you'd be able to get from London to New York in less than 8 hours. So if you want to fly jets and you want to fly them fast, kerosene is the only show in town today.
And just to add to that, because they have immense energy density as well, they tend not to just randomly explode. So they've got some nice characteristics, right?
Nice fuel stability, great consistency, viscosity. It really is the ideal way to run aviation, is fossil-based hydrocarbon kerosene. And all we want to do is the same thing except synthetic. And what we do uniquely is we're commercializing this thermal hybrid production pathway, which we'll talk a bit more about. And that allows us to target costs that are 70% lower than our analysis of the next cheapest incumbents. So synthetic fuel has been around a long time. It's just never been both economic and clean. We can make it clean, but historically that's been really expensive. We can make it cheaply, but that usually involves a lot of coal or natural gas going into the system. And so Syntholene is here to usher in the technological advent of being able to couple both the carbon neutrality as well as the cost efficiency.
Excellent.
There's some peers in the market. They're all private. Syntholene is the only publicly traded synthetic fuel pure play that exists on any global exchange today. And these companies have achieved exceptional valuations despite none of them having commercial scale production today. So we like to represent this slide as a good opportunity for Syntholene to pursue a valuation range should we be successful in effectively demonstrating beyond the shadow of a doubt that our technology exists not just in a lab environment as it does today, but also in a demonstration facility that we're seeking to achieve in 2026. And so lots of appetite for these e-fuel producers in the private market, and we're very pleased to be able to bring that message to the capital markets in Canada, increasingly in Germany, where we've got a co-listing on the Frankfurt Exchange and across Europe, and then hopefully soon on the OTC as well, where we're actively pursuing a co-listing. So proud to be able to work with a team of subject matter experts and legitimate world-class operators. My co-founder, Ken and Brian, is also a co-founder of Uranium Energy Corp. They've been on an absolute tear recently. He founded and staked the Elk Creek, Nebraska niobium project, which became the cornerstone asset for NioCorp, also a critical metals story that's garnered a lot of attention recently. And most recently, he took his private small modular reactor company, Terrestrial Energy, public on the NASDAQ, and that achieved a valuation, listing valuation of about $2.5 billion. It's settled out to about 1.5 today. But this is a guy who's built multiple multi-billion dollar advanced energy success stories, and a really great guy to be able to help us clear the path to the best investors, the best institutional exposure, and a lot of great strategics. John and Jack are our engineering backbone. John's a guy who's deployed many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure for large industrials like Dow and DuPont. He's overseen project management of tons of metal in the ground on time and on budget, and is a seasoned veteran of deploying advanced energy infrastructure. Jack is more of our Fischer-Tropsch reactor specialist. That's the fuel synthesis reactor. That's kind of one of the cornerstones to our supply chain. He was on the team that put the first synthetic fuel into a KLM Airlines flight that actually went across the Atlantic with passengers. So we're not inventing a new fuel here. This stuff is a commodity product, albeit a specialty commodity. And Jack and teams like his have actually made it work in airlines, and it's widely consumed at an industrial scale today, as well as Jens Thordersen, who's one of our boots on the ground in Iceland. Iceland's a really critical part of our story. They've got exceptionally low cost geothermal energy, which provides both heat and electricity. And both of those inputs are solid gold to us. So Jens has helped us build strong political relationships, strong relationships with utilities and project developers in Iceland. And we're really proud to be producing fuel in Iceland for Iceland, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the presentation as it goes forward. We're also really lucky to be partnered with an absolute team of A players in the Inventa Capital Group. These are the team that brought you Vizsla Silver. I think it just breached a $3 billion market cap in the last few weeks. Mike Connor and Craig Perry, they've developed a ton of amazing pathways from sort of startup scale drilling programs all the way through to large producers listed on major capital exchanges like NASDAQ and the NYSE. And these guys have supported us since our private stages. They are encouraged by our technology. They had the technical capability to diligence us and saw what we were looking for early. And incredible value add to have Mike and Craig, especially, helping shape my strategy for everything from investor relations to capital markets exposure, and bring in bankers that have had great success with these guys and want to continue to replicate that success. ESAF for airlines is mandated for consumption in the EU and the UK. Any airline that lands at a European Economic Zone airport or UK airport must consume a subset of the fuel that we make. And starting in 2030, it looks like that's already going to be undersupplied in the sort of single digit, low digit billions of dollars. But it's largely due to the constrained unit economics of our competitors. The market's having a tough time scaling up. A lot of our peers produce this fuel at the sort of $6 to $9 a liter range, and that is really hard to bank on absent subsidy. Essentially, without subsidies, without mandates, without policy measures to help encourage adoption of this fuel, those producers would be so substantially uneconomic that it would be very difficult for airlines or military consumers or other consumers of the fuel to justify purchasing it voluntarily. And so, what the market really needs is a low cost producer, someone to come in and say, we've had a breakthrough in how we produce this fuel and can start to approach even within a hair's breadth or within a range of fossil fuel competitiveness. And that is what Syntholene exists to do. This slide is probably the whole company summed up in one page in the presentation. And that is, we have this fuel market that has achieved these absolutely exceptional price premiums, oftentimes about 10 times higher than what airlines pay for fossil-based hydrocarbons. We've got an average competitor cost in the $6 to $9 range. I'm probably being a bit generous with this slide. But Syntholene's target cost of production based on just a small commercial module of production is down there at 124. This is the first production process that has been demonstrated practically at a prototype level that, if scaled to sufficient production, would actually be able to approach cost competitiveness with fossil fuels. So it's feasible over the next 5 years or 10 years that, should Syntholene reach its commercial scale up aspirations, we could actually be substantially cheaper than what people are paying for fossil fuels today, while delivering higher performance fuel that has higher energy density per kilogram and carbon neutrality. So this technology all exists today. We didn't actually invent much of the systems that we integrate. There were a few key pieces of innovation that we had to deliver in order to integrate these systems, but this can only exist for so long before firms like us, firms like our competitors, cotton on to the fact that the industrially mature supply chain components exist today to produce synthetic fuel at radically lower costs than fossil fuels. And I think the great news for your audience is that we will live to see that widespread adoption. Synthetic fuels will become part of your day-to-day life within your lifetimes. And if Syntholene has anything to say about it, we want to deliver that future within the next 5 years. How do we know we can do it? Well, it has been done. So at the Idaho National Laboratory in 2022, in collaboration with some of my team members, we built a prototype, and this prototype used thermal and electrical hybrid energy inputs to operate a high temperature electrolysis device and demonstrate the low cost production of hydrogen. Hydrogen is an absolutely critical feedstock, probably the cornerstone feedstock to synthetic fuels. And then we combine it with carbon to make our own designer molecules of long chain hydrocarbons. But very simply put, the relationship of energy costs through efficient processes directly correlates to the price of hydrogen, and that hydrogen directly correlates to the price of synthetic fuels. Said another way, if you get cheap energy, use it efficiently, make cheap hydrogen, then all of the rest of the supply chain falls into place to be able to produce these fuels at low cost. The fuel that we actually make, as I mentioned, is superior in its energy densities. It is molecularly pure. I think that's really well visualized in this slide because fossil jet fuel has these deleterious adulterants that cause nasty emissions of copper, cadmium, and lead, but those adulterants also impede engine and turbine performance. So, regardless of your views on climate change, this is actually a superior quality fuel. It allows planes to fly higher, it allows planes to fly faster, it allows planes to approach regions in the atmosphere with less friction, and it is drop in substitutable for use in today's modern turbines and turbofans, as well as its carbon neutrality. So, notwithstanding its environmental advantages, it has huge promise, especially for high performance military applications, high performance commercial aviation applications, and simply out of self interest, people will be consuming this fuel increasingly, allowing lighter fuel payloads for same distance traveled. Really proud to have announced just 2 days ago that we have established our first expression of interest with Icelandair. Icelandair is super energy forward. They love the adoption of these fuels as long as they can be produced cost efficiently. I actually misspoke on this slide. It's 25 million liters a year, which takes us to a 250 million liter a year, 10-year expression of interest. And that expression of interest is non-priced and non-binding today. There are binding elements in it, but we're really looking forward to advancing this into a formal offtake agreement with take or pay terms over the course of the next few quarters. And Icelandair is a relatively small airline. This is a huge amount of fuel, and it just underscores that even one or two more incremental customers will take us into the many hundreds of millions of liters of production. And so there's a huge demand for this fuel, and airlines are increasingly compelled to be getting in front of production systems. They need to be able to secure their production allocations from firms like Syntholene, and they're increasingly willing to write these long-term expressions of interest and similar agreements well in advance of production infrastructure being deployed. The meat of our deal is really well structured. We have Inventa Capital to thank for this, and our structure is exceptionally tight. We've got long-term lockups on founder shares and insider ownership. Our shell is very tightly held. We've entered into a shell called GK Resources that is substantially owned by three large investors. And that has allowed us to maintain an exceptionally limited free trading float. I think structurally, this is really well set up, not just to grow short term and have exciting share price appreciation and volume appreciation on the back of more buying, but also long term for us to maintain control of our destiny, for us to be able to avoid the nasty dilutive raises that oftentimes let or compel these small scale startups to let their structure get away from them. And so for sophisticated investors, tight structure is absolutely where you want to participate. And I think we have a top priority of maintaining tight structural ownership going forward, no matter how much resources we raise. That's us. You can find us on the TSXV and the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. We're pursuing an OTC listing as well, and we'll have more information on that as it becomes material. But really excited to be building this company, really excited to be building in this sector, and really excited to be attracting new investors, hearts and minds one at a time. We've laid a solid foundation in our early days of trading, and we're looking forward to delivering value incrementally over time, one step at a time, but moving mountains as we move forward into this brave new world.
Dan, thank you very much. That was good. You covered the different areas quite well. Just since we're on the last slide there, it's clearly a tight float, but it just numerically wise, it is what, less than 10 million shares free trading, or like of real free float on the company right now?
68 million issued and outstanding. About 25% of that is officially free trading. So I think that takes us
Yeah.
to sort of between 15 and 20. But we happen to know that much of that quote unquote free trading float is held by partners that want to see what we can do over the next 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
So the real free trading float is actually a lot more limited than that.
Yeah.
And as we bring on additional financial resources, as we bring on additional partners, we're really looking for people who appreciate the value that needs to be created over those year to 18-month timelines. Give me
Yeah.
18 months and I'll give you a company that looks completely different than the one that we're building at this early stage today.
Your base of operations, you're a distributed company with, we were discussing this previously, you're in Vancouver, some engineers and so forth are in Chicago, I believe, and then the upfront facility is in Iceland, correct?
That is correct. And it's sort of a function of how early we are. We had
Yeah.
to go find talent spread all across the world. So we do have operators in Vancouver and Toronto, engineers in Chicago, other engineers in LA, and we've got a really cool project spooling up there. And then our core operations are in Iceland, but we also have team members in the UK and in Finland. So it's kind of a collection, ragtag collection of world experts in this industry field that is spread and distributed. There is no real core hub for e-fuel production quite yet. But
Yeah.
it also means that at any given hour of the day, there's someone working on Syntholene, which I think is kind of cool. I wake up in the
Yeah.
morning and a bunch of work's been done overnight. I get to do some work and set off a bunch of other projects as they go overnight. And running a remote first company is not simple, but when you get the right mindsets, the right self-starting initiatives from your operators, it's absolutely achievable in this day and age.
All right. Your operations in Iceland, can you talk about what exactly you're doing there on sort of a technical basis and how your system works and sort of conceptually how what you do that makes it where you can be by such a large order of magnitude, a low cost leader in the field?
Fantastic. So the core secret sauce, not so secret sauce of how we deliver these breakthrough unit economics is that we use these relatively recently industrially mature hydrogen production systems called high temperature electrolysis, also known as solid oxide electrolyzer cells. These were sort of conceptual in the 2000s. They reached a degree of commercial maturity around the mid 2010s, and now they are in active wide industrial use. They're a special system because they deliver just with electricity alone about 40% stronger efficiencies than historical electrolyzer devices such as proton electron membrane or alkaline devices. But they also have the unique ability, because they operate at high temperatures, to accept priming heat. So we can use heat instead of electricity alone to get the system up towards its operating temperature. And then we use net less electricity, which is the core cost driver of the hydrogen costs, to be able to crack water into hydrogen and produce that hydrogen efficiently. Now, these systems were explored and discovered to use heat sources such as high temperature nuclear reactors in their origination story. By using a small modular reactor that operates at high temperature, you get this very, very cheap access to thermal energy, to industrial steam that comes out at very high temperatures. Now, the Unfortunate thing about small modular reactors is there aren't many of them operating today, and they're still a few years out in terms of their ability to reach the same level of industrial maturity to couple up with the SOEC. So, what my team set out to do was find other sources of low emissions, high heat energy assets. And there are none better than the geothermal resources in Iceland. Iceland is uniquely situated above a massive endowment of geothermal resources. We are talking known and discovered assets that are gigawatts and gigawatts and gigawatts, and feasibly tens or even hundreds of gigawatts that are understood but perhaps not yet mapped. These are shallow geothermal assets, which directly translates into them being low cost. The less you have to drill, the easier the energy is to access. And they're also exceptionally hot. There are known geothermal fields in Iceland that deliver heat at 300, 400 degrees Celsius, many that produce at 200 plus degrees Celsius. So hot, in fact, that to use them for domestic use, they actually have to step down the heat and dilute it with cold water. So it's useful as a district heating input. And so in Iceland today, we are in the process of securing and developing a specific set of sites that will allow us to take that low cost heat and electricity from municipalities that are amenable and open to seeing more e-fuel production in their regions. These regions also have huge amount of potential scalability. They've got great assets delivered and delivering energy today, but they also have aspirations for more industrial users, diversified industrial users, and aspirations to produce more and more of their own hydrocarbon fuel consumption domestically. And so, what we seek in those regions is municipal alignment. We want to find people that are ambitious to build these projects, not that are going to drag us through slow permitting processes and frustrate the process with bureaucracy, such as we might find in other nations like Canada, where there really is, unfortunately, a lot of bureaucratic impedance to being able to deliver these kinds of advanced energy projects. We're looking for energy sources that are shallow and are hot, and we're looking for expandability, the capability to deliver a demonstration facility, which we aspire to have operational by the end of 2026. And then from there, on similar sites or even the same sites, be able to scale up to commercial production over the ensuing next couple of years.
All right, I just want to simplify this down a bit. An electrolyzer, and just make sure everyone understands the terms here, takes water, H2O, breaks it apart so you get the H's separated from the O's, and then that H is the H that goes into the hydrocarbon fuel that you're producing, correct?
It's absolutely right. And it's easy for me to get a little too deep into the technical details. This is what I do every day.
Yeah,
But hydrocarbon fuels are really simply long chains of combined hydrogen and carbon. Those
yeah.
are our two core feedstocks. And generally, when you make a fossil fuel or you make a biofuel, you have to refine down from a crude input.
Yeah.
Fossil based petroleum, for biofuels, it could be corn oil, soybean oil, waste food oil, and you take that crude and you separate it out into fractions, and then you get certain light fuels, certain heavier fuels, and certain gases. The advantage to fuel synthesis is we're coming at it from the other way. We need to get those constituent feedstocks. Hydrogen cracked from water, exactly right, starts out as H2O. We agitate the molecule to a place where it's volatile enough to crack, get that hydrogen, which is our core feedstock, and oxygen, which is also a great industrial input, but let's call that a co-product that we can disregard. We haven't modeled any monetization of that oxygen. Then when we have the hydrogen, we can buy carbon from a diversity of different biogenic sources or point source carbon emissions, and then we create the hydrocarbon molecules from the ground up. Designer molecules exactly in the ranges that we want. In our case, kerosene or jet fuel is sort of in the CH12 to CH16 range, and we just architect them just the way we want them to get that pure molecular output without the adulterants inherent in refining from any crude, petroleum-based crude or bio-based crude.
And that's where you those two pictures of the burning kerosene, the darker yellow one is pretty clean, but still has other junk in there, which is causing the smoke and the unclean burning, while yours is you're building it, not separating it out. So you get a much cleaner process in there. So your electrolyzer that operates more efficiently at a high temperature. So you put it by the steam vent or you pump it up, and then you can operate it at a very high temperature without having to sort of or pay for that heat very inexpensively. And then you extract the hydrogen out of that. Are you able that steam does because you still need electricity? Does that steam then run a turbine or anything else? So you generate electricity and sort of to process sort of low cost energy out of it.
It's exactly right. That's why
Okay.
we're able to utilize these thermally active, very hot energy sources. And we
Yeah.
essentially take two bites out of that same energy apple. So the
Yeah.
first thing we do with the steam is spin that turbine and generate electricity, but that is relatively inefficient. It kicks
Yeah.
off a lot of waste steam. And so
Yeah.
that waste heat is gold to us. We
Yeah.
use that waste heat as our priming input to get that system up to its closer to its operating temperature. And
Yeah.
then we can use that electricity, but net less of it. Now,
All right.
geothermal is a great way to generate electricity in a low cost way.
Yeah.
Iceland's already doing it at an exceptionally low cost, especially for their industrial users. The industrial energy price, electricity price, I should say, is already very, very low. But when we throw in that bonus of having free high temperature steam that would otherwise be wasted, that's what allows us to really start attacking these unit economics that can start to get pretty quickly at relatively small scale competitive with fossil fuel prices.
Okay, so so you take that extra heat and that the okay that's the H side of the equation. You mentioned it briefly. The C side of it, the carbon. Where do you get the carbon from?
It will be amazing to be able to use systems like direct air capture, new technologies like direct ocean capture to treat the
Yeah,
atmosphere essentially like a huge battery and also a bank account. The carbon that's in the atmosphere has value as a commodity input to our system, but
yeah,
these direct air capture and direct ocean capture technologies, they're still a few years away from prime time in terms of their economic viability.
yeah.
Now, I have had some pretty compelling recent conversations. There are a few companies that I think are a lot closer than people realize to being able to deliver those carbon molecules at a price competitive with industrial carbon today. And so we'll see. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 2 years, but one day the integration of direct air capture to fuel synthesis will be an economically competitive reality. Now, in
All
the
right.
meantime, there are lots of great sources of carbon inputs that we can eligibly use to make this green fuel and still incentivize producers of that carbon, which is often a waste product from things like pulp and paper mills or garbage facilities, that is a cost base for those companies. They have to pay to clean it up, they have to pay to
Yeah,
dispose of it. And companies like Syntholene can actually turn that cost base into a revenue stream. We're
yeah,
saying your waste carbon, your garbage carbon is valuable to us. And so instead of sequestering the carbon or burying it or using it as a waste cost base, we would like to incentivize those companies to sell us biogenic or point source captured CO2. And both of those sources represent highly economic inputs for us in the meantime, while we're waiting for technologies like direct air capture and direct ocean capture to catch up economically.
so the okay, and sorry, I'm forgetting the name of the mechanism, the two-person name of the system that then creates the kerosene out of your feedstocks. What is that called again?
It's called a Fischer Tropsch reactor. It's
Thank you.
actually about 120 years old. We've known how to synthesize carbon and hydrogen into hydrocarbon fuels for a really long time.
Yeah.
These systems keep getting better. There's also other systems that are gaining traction in the market today. systems like methanol to jet and alcohol to jet, which target more in a more focused output, the ability to produce sustainable aviation fuel. And so we're really lucky to have some of the world experts in those fields. They've done work with oil and gas super majors to validate these at a substantially industrial scale. And Fischer-Tropsch reactor, methanol to jet systems, these are going to be of substantial interest to us without the need for much innovation. Syntholene doesn't need to change these systems or adapt them specifically. We can just buy them off the shelf. And where our IP comes in is in how we integrate them effectively with the low-cost thermal hybrid energy sources such as geothermal.
Okay, so the carbon feedstock is CO2 that you're putting in with the hydrogen gas, and then the Fischer-Tropsch mechanism breaks them and combines them. Is that right?
That is correct. CO2 in gas form or transportable in liquid form is probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah,
It's also feasible to use carbon monoxide or just straight carbon, but it sort of
yeah.
depends on the processes with how they capture that carbon. And CO2 certainly is the most widely available today.
Because you were there, we do have a question from the audience here. Is steam electrolysis a novel idea? And as well, you mentioned earlier, you're like a systems integrator. You're taking these, you're optimizing existing components, creating a new optimized system by which to create your synthetic jet fuel or kerosene. Is that right?
That is correct. So, to the first question, steam methane reforming is how most industrial carbon is produced today,
Yeah.
or most industrial hydrogen, I should say, is produced today. That hydrogen has a lot of different applications in things like uprating fuel or chemical synthesis for things like fertilizers and ammonia. And actually, the hydrogen industry using steam methane reforming generally, but without necessarily being green hydrogen, is already like a $200 billion a year industry. It's actually how we
Yeah.
feed half the planet is with synthetic fertilizers. So this whole thing of like the novelty of the hydrogen economy, there's an existing hydrogen economy and it works really well. The thing with steam methane reforming is that you use natural gas to separate out the hydrogen. It's a long understood process, been around a long time. And because of that natural gas input, it is not eligible for hydrogen as an input to things like sustainable aviation fuel or e-diesel or e-gasoline or any synthetic fuel that is purporting to meet an emissions reduction target because of the inherent emissions with the natural gas. So steam methane reforming, awesome, really great ways to use natural gas. I'm a huge fan of natural gas. Natural gas has a way lower emissions profile to generate heat than something like coal. So we should be doing that. We should be doing more of that. But simply in itself, if we want to approach this ESAF or synthetic sustainable aviation fuel market, we cannot actually use steam methane reforming as it stands today. We've got to use a low emissions energy source such as geothermal to operate a different electrolysis process, which is called solid oxide electrolyzer cells. Now, there's a second part to your question.
The theme of the discussion was you're like a systems integrator and creating a more efficient system, and you're integrating existing technologies, although vastly improved over the years. And I guess that's the gist of what you're doing, right?
It's absolutely correct. We're the substantial beneficiaries of many, many tens of billions of dollars worth of R&D that has flown into the electrolyzer sector, the fuel synthesis reactor sector over the course of the last 20, 30, 50 years. And so we stand at a time where we're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. These systems have all been proven out. They work at industrial capacity. There's no more science. There's no more technology needed to be able to demonstrate that like this is the integration of systems that would be able to produce this low cost synthetic fuel. Now, integration IP is a huge part of our IP portfolio, and my engineers are very stingy with BTUs. Every thermal energy unit is useful, and the more efficient we are with reintroducing exothermic heat waste to endothermic processes, that allows us to maintain cost control in a way that's probably substantially more sophisticated than some of our peers. And the thing that we had to do uniquely, and where a core piece of our process IP exists, is in the integration of geothermal energy to SOEC. Geothermal energy is amazingly thermally active and very hot and very abundant in that energy, but it also comes from the guts of the earth. So we've got entrained silica, sulfur, phosphates, all kinds of stuff that would be inappropriate as an industrial steam input. Those adulterants need to be refined out in some way. And so we realized there wasn't really an existing system to do that effectively, to turn geothermal steam into industrial high purity heat input in the form of steam. And so that's one cornerstone of our IP portfolio. We were really lucky to achieve a provisional patent in June of 2025 on a system that we call the thermal coupling. It essentially accepts dirty geothermal steam, it transfers heat energy to deionized water, and allows us to take dirty geothermal steam and turn it into an industrial energy input.
Where are you in you're developing your pilot plant? Where are you right now, and what milestones, like what are the stages of development over the next 12 months and then just over the next couple years? Where do you expect to be?
So we are pretty lucky that at the Idaho National Lab, a prototype of this system was built, it was operated, the efficiencies were demonstrated, and in fact, all of the findings from that study are in the public domain. So people can Google Idaho National Lab, SOEC Lab, and they can find all of these amazing research reports going all the way back to 2015 and then again in 2022, demonstrating the efficiencies and demonstrating the pathway to hydrogen feedstock costs that would enable costs for synthetic fuel that are lower than the costs of fossil fuel. So I was sort of blown away that more people don't talk about this. Like, this is all public domain information. And what hasn't happened yet is the first demonstration of that lab scale prototype, which admittedly was in a controlled environment in a lab setting. It used a simulated heat source in the form of a boiler that was replicating inputs from a similar heat and character to what you get from a nuclear reactor or from a geothermal resource. And that is where Syntholene comes in. We're actively developing the world's first demonstration facility adjacent to a real world geothermal energy asset in a region where there's a lot of abundant surplus geothermal. And we're hoping to have that operational, commissioned, and ready for testing by the end of 2026. And that will be the world's first demonstration of this low cost production pathway. Should we be successful in demonstrating that and replicating the results that we found at Idaho National Lab, which is a non trivial risk? I mean, being able to do something in a lab environment and then do it again in the real world, that's where a lot of these technology projects and science projects fall off. But if we are lucky enough to be able to execute and skilled enough to be able to execute, that will come, in my view, with a pretty groundbreaking set of results and hopefully a material re-rate of our value in market based on having the first conclusive field tested proof of performance that enables us to then go and envision a scale up into commercial production, which even on a rapid timeline is sort of over 2027, 2028. Getting shovels in the ground on a commercial scale production facility into 2028 would put us substantially ahead of the pack of current e-fuel producers, many of whom are struggling to get the kinds of industrial investment they need to scale into commercial production. But I think it's a worthy aspiration. And I think that being the world's first to deliver that low cost production pathway unlocks a lot of value and also unlocks a true pathway to be able to produce these clean, high performance fuels cost competitively with fossil fuels at scale.
Like in a reasonable scenario, you would be producing commercially synthetic clean jet fuel in what, 2029 or?
Sure. Let's call it the
Okay.
end of the decade so that I can have a
Okay.
little buffer zone.
All
I've
right.
gotten a lot of good advice from very smart people that says, don't say dates too much, but
Okay.
that's in the wheelhouse of where
In
we are.
that kind of area. Okay.
With lots of other material milestones to come along the way. We've got
Yeah.
lots of stuff to do on the commercial side, customers, moving those contracts forward, third party validations, industrial collaborations, strategic investments. We've got a lot of things that we've got to go accomplish. And every time we push one of those material milestones over the line, I think it's going to further and further help our investors understand that this is not only real, but it's happening a lot faster than the rest of the market anticipated.
And let's say over the next 12 months in sort of the near term, call it investment horizon, what kind of catalysts or milestones should investors be waiting for?
Things that we're working on actively right now are increasing the diversity of our customer base. We love Iceland Air. We want to give them all the fuel they need in Iceland for Iceland, and they're a fantastic cornerstone customer for us. But all the airlines and fuel intermediaries and oil and gas super majors that we've had conversations with help us appreciate how undersupplied this market really is. So I think more progression towards an understanding of what kind of production footprint we're going to need to be able to supply these undersupplied fuels even as early as sort of 2030. Those are really important validations. We've got some third-party validations that we're doing on our tech, on our profile. There's a healthy amount of reasonable skepticism saying, how likely are you to be able to get this lab scale prototype functioning in a demo facility? And certainly investors that come in at this relatively low market cap, they've got to account for that risk. And so helping get third parties across our technical diligence, we love to get red teamed, come in, pick us apart, tell us where we've got it wrong. And I can say we've been pretty successful with those third parties thus far, continuing to enhance our ambitions and aspirations. And we will walk investors through every step in our construction process. It's going to be really fun to show the beginnings of just a couple of shipping containers coming together, getting assembled in the United States, getting deployed in Iceland, getting hooked up, all that kind of stuff. And so we really want to demonstrate to the market that we move with thorough transparency and we also move with pace. And so I think there'll be lots more in store in terms of adding strategic participants to our team, adding strategic participants to our table, and continuing to set achievable aspirations and knock them down time and again. That's one thing that I'm really committed to, is just making sure we have a consistent reputation of execution. If that's happening for Syntholene week in and week out, then the market will come to trust that we're a team that says what we're going to do and executes on what we say.
I've got two questions here that I'm going to combine from the audience. One is, what is your biggest concern in the scale-up process as well? And you've addressed it somewhat here, but what are the technical objectives you're seeking to achieve in the next 12 to 18 months?
Technical objectives would be functional integration of geothermal real-world energy to low-cost hydrogen production. If we can do that and even get in the ballpark of similar results to the lab results, that is like the ultimate technical achievement. It's hard to overstate the impacts of being able to get the similar efficiencies that we saw in a lab environment into the real world, because it really unlocks many, many billions of potential liters of production of e-fuels. And what are my biggest things that keep me up at night, or biggest risks? There's like 1,000 little ones. So anytime you do a construction project, whether it's renovating your kitchen or building an oil refinery, it is a nightmare. There is no bones about it that it is exceptionally difficult for many, many companies to go from lab scale prototype to first demonstration to commercial scale production. In the interim between demonstration facility and commercial scale up, we have to achieve community validation. We have to achieve environmental permitting. We have to achieve feed studies, engineering designs, validation of that real world work, and scalability analysis. There's project finance work where luckily we're the beneficiaries of a lot of tailwinds in resource access. We can get a lot of resources in the form of very low cost loans against future fuel offtake agreements, even government participation in the forms of grants and non-commercial loans. But all of those are a huge amount of financial sophistication and bureaucracy, and navigating that is how I've architected our entire org structure. How can we get people that have done project financing before, that have seen these kinds of facilities scaled up, and instead of having to embark on first of a kind engineering and technology projects, we can actually use proven playbooks that have worked before. But it's important not to gloss over the complexity of going through all of those processes. And it really is like 20 different initiatives that we're going to have to manage super effectively. And that really is why we've built the team the way that we have. People that have done this kind of stuff before, and we can draw on their experience, not just their aspirations.
What is the amount of capital raised to date, and what are your capital needs over the next, 12 to 18 months?
First of all, the founders were into the sort of science and technology aspect of the business for about $750,000 before we even started the company, really. Like we founded the company and had a fresh start, but they'd already put a bunch of their personal capital into just exploring if this was even feasible. We raised about 1.5 million privately, and then another 3.5 million in our concurrent RTO financing. And we'll probably need another, let's say, 8 million or so to get the demonstration facility complete, and that's all before the end of the year. So we do need more resources. You can't raise all the resources you need necessarily in your first financings, but we're substantially the beneficiaries of playbooks that have really worked well for the Invented Capital team and for others in our team to be able to take incremental sips at the market that are both not extremely dilutive, but give us the resources we need when we need them. So additional financing is a risk that any investor coming into the stock today should keep in mind, but we're going to deliver that in a way that maintains a tight structure, is not overly dilutive. And I think in the context of what we're trying to achieve, the 8 million to get that demo facility up and operating is not a huge quantum of capital. And I've been increasingly confident recently that it seems achievable for Syntholene.
Is your plan to just buy heat long term through existing geoplant co-located projects, or do you plan to develop greenfield geothermal sites yourself to own and operate?
Really sophisticated question. And anytime you're doing a project where the cornerstone of your cost base comes back to energy, I think exploring ways to vertically integrate is obviously entirely relevant. Now, I'm not sure that we need to be CapEx providers to geothermal exploration and power plants. And that's because that sector and segment is really mature. It works really well, especially in Iceland. They're very, very effective at developing new geothermal fields, many of which have already been explored, and turning those into incremental, accretive power for their grid or for co-located behind the meter users. But I do pay mind to the potential for vertical integration, but perhaps in a way that doesn't necessarily necessitate Syntholene making CapEx investments in geothermal exploration, power plant development, et cetera. For instance, say we incentivized a local geothermal power plant that already exists to continue to expand their production capacity incrementally over multiple years and offer that power to us at close to operational cost, as close as they can possibly get. And instead of then paying a premium for that energy, we cut them into an albeit larger profit share from the sale of the fuel. By getting low cost energy, we can create this fuel at such a radical cost reduction that it affords us a substantial margin opportunity. And if they take on that risk of us selling the fuel together, I think they would see more substantial upside of ostensibly being in the fuel production business, but without having to own shares of Syntholene, without Syntholene having to have an equity position in those power plant developers. So everything from project focused special purpose vehicles all the way through to co-financing joint ventures. There's lots of cool ways to do vertical integration in the cost stack without us necessarily having to raise hundreds of millions for fuel production infrastructure and also hundreds of millions for incremental geothermal infrastructure.
Well, it would make sense to me. They like as good as they are, and you said it's there's still a lot of heat that's not utilized in geothermal electrical production. So if you do a bolt-on facility onto an existing one, you've got a power source there already. You've got all this excess heat, and then you save a lot of the capex to drill it and all that stuff. Does that make sense?
Co-locating fuel production infrastructure behind the meter with existing geothermal assets is
Yeah,
really critical to our strategy. If we can
gotcha.
get
Okay.
that done, that means we can go where the heat is abundant and cheap. And we
Yeah,
make the fuel, which is a chemical battery that is eminently transportable, distributable. We can use the same tankers, the same pipelines that are moving petroleum all across the world today. And
yeah,
so that it allows us essentially, like philosophically, to transmute stranded geothermal energy that's only in one place and it's not necessarily co-located to demand to fuel that we can then move all around the world at exceptionally low costs. So that is a
Yeah.
really great way to frame that conversation. Let's go where the power and heat is cheap and turn
Yeah.
that into fuel that we can then distribute to demand in a far more cost efficient way.
It's essentially a form of energy storage. It's like a battery of sorts. It's chemical, and then yeah. So,
Hydrocarbon fuels, sorry to interject, but hydrocarbon fuels are a uniquely amazing form of energy storage. I saw an image the
incredibly
other
dense.
day,
Yes.
incredibly dense. When a plane has a fuel line running into its tank, the
Yeah.
fuel running through that line represents more energy than is produced by an AP1000 large scale nuclear power plant.
Oh,
That is
yeah.
how energy, for the time that it's refueling, it is moving more energy than the largest nuclear power plants on Earth. So
Yeah.
that's just a testament to the unique nature of hydrocarbon fuels. And I think why we're going to want to continue to use them as long as we can, thousands of years, far long after fossil reserves are uneconomic or depleted or what have you, which is not an immediate problem today, but it will become an increasingly uneconomic solution over the course of our lifetimes.
Yeah. And this feeds now into two questions here that are very similar. If the aviation fuel is made in Iceland, how do you get it to airplanes around the world? And then, as well, if ESAF has to be made near geothermal sites, will transportation to fuel to airports around the world increase the costs substantially?
We already make fuel very far away from demand, especially when it comes to airports. So
Yeah.
there aren't many airports. I mean, unless you're flying to the Middle East or you're flying to somewhere with a huge amount of crude oil, we're
Yeah.
taking cheap crude somewhere, refining it generally somewhere else, and then using it somewhere completely different. And
Yeah.
so the transportation efficiency of hydrocarbon fuels is really hard to overstate. When
Yeah.
we take a tanker full of kerosene and move it from the port of Reykjavik to the port of Rotterdam, where there's a huge hub of pipeline infrastructure that can transport it essentially all across Europe, that might add, tiny fractions of 1 percentage point to your margins. So that's
Yeah.
really why the math of getting the fuel produced in the place where the energy is exceptionally cheap and then moving it around to places where the demand is higher through transportation systems that are really, really cheap. I mean, we're moving 100 million barrels a day around the world every single day through hundreds of thousands of tankers and pipelines, and we're really, really good at it. The example of crude feedstocks coming from Central America or South America, going to the Middle East to get refined, and then being sold back to the same domestic producer as gasoline, like that's happening every day. So we're lucky that we've got 150 years worth of petroleum distribution infrastructure, and this kind of fuel can continue to use that infrastructure.
The world is very good at moving around hydrocarbons efficiently. So, yes.
You heard it. You heard it here first.
Yeah, yeah. All right. And then one last question here from the audience is, are there any industrial carbon sources in Iceland?
There are industrial carbon sources in Iceland. There's large aluminum production facilities that don't actually use fossil-based inputs for their energy. They're run hydroelectrically, but the nature of the aluminum refining process has anodes that decay and create large concentrations of CO2 in their flue gas. Now, it may be that we can work towards some kind of arrangement to help incentivize those industrial emitters to segregate their point source carbon and sell it to us as a commodity. But we're also very sensitive about aluminum supply chains. These are factories that literally are targeting 99.9% uptime. So it's very, very important that we can make a case to those aluminum smelters that we would not interrupt or not slow down their production capabilities. And so the other perhaps better incentivized source is biogenic sources such as effluent and waste from wood, pulp and paper mills or garbage dumps. And these are a lot more prolific across Europe. So it could be that in the interim, while we sort of wait for direct air capture, that we could use industrial point source emissions or biogenic sources, and we're really actively working on that with some really interesting partners. It is also true that the European Union is dramatically incentivizing the capture from industrial sources and from biogenic sources. So
Yeah.
look forward to more updates on that from Syntholene in the coming months.
And I'm just curious, would you, instead of using carbon dioxide, could you use, or I guess, methane? Would you like natural off-gassing methane? Could that be slid as an input into your system relatively easily?
There's sort of a small subset of approved carbon sources that meet the standards for Refuel EU and RED
Okay.
2 and RED 3 that are the protocols that validate how much emissions reduction a green fuel uses.
Yeah.
And sort of that seems to be ebbing and flowing and changing. And sometimes they allow more biogenic sources or less. And so that is a sort of shifting policy landscape. We're just
Yeah.
focusing on the ones that are really well anchored and really obvious that they're going to be long term viable as inputs to ESAF. And so
Yeah.
anytime you bring in methane or natural gas, you sort of run the risk of abridging a fossil based emission. And that's
Yeah.
something that the EU does not want to incentivize. They really want to incentivize capture from point source, capture from biogenic sources, but they
Yeah.
want to move increasingly away from fossil based supply chain.
Well, what I mean by methane is like waste off gas, which is all biogenic, and it's way better to burn it than to let it go into the atmosphere, and then even way better to put it into kerosene. That's the source of methane I was implying there.
Absolutely. In my hometown of Vancouver, BC, in Delta, there's a big garbage dump and it off gases methane. They capture the methane, they use it as cogen for natural gas
Yes.
generators, and then use that to generate electricity. And we're making the methane from the garbage anyway. We should capture it
Yeah.
and use it to the best of our ability.
All right, we need to wrap it up here, Dan. Thank you very much. So, but just one final sort of pitch, quick 30 seconds on what you want what do you want to leave investors with, the big finale pitch here.
First and foremost, e-fuel market growing from 8 billion this year, incredibly emergent, very small, to 215 billion projected by 2032. It's one of the fastest growing subsets of the energy sector. If all you take from this is to go do some diligence on the e-fuel sector, who are the players, who's doing it cost efficiently, that in and of itself is a great subject and focus matter to grow your portfolio in that segment over the course of just the next few years. But in order to unlock the true value of the sector, which is not in the hundreds of billions, it is in the trillions and trillions. We need low cost production. Syntholene is approaching low cost production uniquely. And although we make a specialty product, a specialty commodity jet fuel product that is high performance, carbon neutral, and drop in substitutable, it is still a commodity product. And the laws of commodity markets still pertain. Those who can do it in a low cost way will be successful long term. Those who cannot do it in a low cost way may benefit from this current mix of subsidies and mandates, but those subsidies and mandates cannot persist forever. And Syntholene wants nothing less than to go toe to toe with fossil based petroleum and prove that the future of synthetic fuel is going to be better quality at a lower price. Should we do that? The opportunity we're unlocking is a civilizational gift of intergenerational fuel abundance.
Dan, great way to end this. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Looking forward to getting updates as you progress throughout the year, and all the best. Thank you very much.
Such a pleasure, Martin. Always enjoy our time together. And thanks so much to the audience. E Fuel, you heard it here first.